those who followed in its wake by changing their positions. Too many senators changed their positions on DREAM. Too many of those up for election changed their moderate positions on the issue of the need for immigration reform. And we continue to face challenges. Just this past Monday afternoon, I was in San Francisco, California, with the honor of representing day laborers in front of an 11-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. At issue was a free speech right of day laborers to stand on sidewalks and seek employment. Now, this is in a legal context of a recent decision by the United States Supreme Court that corporations, which are not even human beings, which don't have an immigration status, I guess that would mean that they're not citizens, they're not legal residents. But a decision by the United States Supreme Court that corporations have First Amendment rights and the right to spend money in elections to support candidates of their choice. But in that context, the main argument being raised by the city in defending an ordinance that stripped the free speech rights of day laborers was that those day laborers should not be allowed to be in court because they were undocumented or because the city assumed that they were undocumented. They had no right to engage in free speech activity on the sidewalk directed towards seeking work. Now, this is just the latest demonstration of the undermining of our nation's constitutional principles and basic foundational beliefs as a result of targeting our community and targeting the immigrant community. This has happened not just with 1070, this has happened not just with the case I just described, but this has happened with far too many proposals in state after state. Indeed, even the rejection of the DREAM Act. Let me revise. The DREAM Act was not rejected. The DREAM Act was supported by a majority of the United States Senate, a majority of the United States House of Representatives. That is not a rejection.
Majority of the American people.
So better said, the obstruction of the DREAM Act at the end of 2010 was a rejection of some of the most basic foundational beliefs and principles of our Constitution and nation. It rejected our notions of family, rejected our notions of responsibility of minors, and perhaps most importantly, it rejected the very notion of public education, that we invest in education because it benefits all of us. By obstructing the DREAM Act, those senators who lacked the courage to be consistent with the principled positions they had taken previously, those senators who lacked that courage basically rejected the notion of public education. But we have seen this before. As long ago as Proposition 187 in California, which sought consciously to undermine our notions not just of public education, public higher education, but our notions of public health, our notions of being in a collective endeavor, a community. We know what 1070 did. It struck against some of the oldest constitutional principles in our nation, rejecting a notion that goes back to the very framing of the Constitution. The notion that only the federal government has the authority to regulate immigration. But they were aware of what they were doing in rejecting not just that long-standing principle, but principles that go back as long as the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the right to be free from unreasonable seizures, searches. The 14th Amendment, going back to the end of our Civil War, the rejection of discriminatory government action, and specifically a rejection of the notion that police could or should target people on the basis of race, language, accent, appearance, last name. They rejected those constitutional principles by enacting SB 1070. We all know that in 2011 they have gone further, seeking to undermine the very basis of citizenship in this nation, seeking to create, whether by constitutional amendment or state legislative chicanery, seeking to create an underclass. People who were born here, but who, because of the prejudices of those who are promoting these measures, would be denied United States citizenship, or, in the most pernicious effort, would be denied the ability to prove their constitutionally granted citizenship from being born in this country. This effort to undermine our Constitution bears a deep irony. I mentioned previously that 1070 strikes against one of the basic principles that goes back to the framing of the Constitution. Too often the other side puts on a powdered wig, dresses like Ben Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, and asserts that the Constitution is theirs. And asserts it because they look like the 18th century signers of the Constitution. They have the legitimacy of the Constitution. But as I said earlier today in one of our sessions, the Constitution belongs to all of us. The Constitution does not belong to those who framed it or signed it. It does not belong to anyone who descends from those framers or who dresses like those framers. It is equally given to us in 2011 by those who gave their blood in the military, so many of them Latino and Latina heroes, gave their blood to defend the Constitution. It is equally handed down to us by all of our ancestors who came here and worked in difficult circumstances, without legal protections in many cases, who worked to make our society and our polity better. It belongs and is handed to us and defended by even the most recent immigrant, regardless of status, who comes to the country with a belief in what it stands for, and that belief is grounded in the Constitution. We have a responsibility in the Latino community to claim the Constitution as our own, to call out what they are doing for what it is, an effort to nullify, to reject our Constitution. We have a responsibility to defend that Constitution, to stand up for it, and to indicate all of those who seek, through obstruction in the United States Senate, through a signature in Phoenix, Arizona, through marching, through the airwaves, condemning people. We need to call out those acts for what they are, a rejection of the basic constitutional principles of our nation, and claim the Constitution as our own. As we move forward in not only rejecting these efforts by those who would undermine what makes this country great, but also promoting efforts that would arrive finally at a federal immigration policy that better reflects our constitutional principles, beginning with the DREAM Act, but extending to all of the other critical measures in progressive immigration reform, greater due process in our immigration courts, greater equal protection in our enforcement efforts, a recognition that our current immigration system embeds within it a racist principle that would require people to wait in different lines, longer lines, based on their race and national origin. We should take on the mantle of the Constitution, in not just rejecting the negative measures, but in promoting the progressive measures. The DREAM Act was about continuing the dream, continuing a dream that's embodied in the words of our Constitution too often, particularly at the beginning of our nation, not in the actions under the Constitution, but embodied in those words and principles that they so easily violate. I urge us to act as delegates together to ensure that the Latino community is the lead defender of our Constitution. Thank you.